Welcome to the Journey Church. We are an online church for people everywhere. This is part 2 in a 3-part mini-series that we're doing here in beautiful Banff National Park. In this series, we're fleshing out a question that I think so many new Christians have. In fact, all Christians, I think, wrestle with this question. What are we actually saved for? If you missed the episode last week, be sure to click the link and go back and watch. Not only is it a great episode, but we bring you along to see some of the most breathtaking views, the kind of things that people travel from around the world just to see. Well, last week we finished up the episode on top of an 8,000 foot tall mountain, reminiscent of the place that God asked Moses to go, to the top of Mount Sinai. It was in this high place that God called Moses up to give him some special instructions. So the instructions that God gave Moses show up in Exodus 19, verses 3 through 6. It says, "Then Moses climbed the mountain to appear before God. And the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, 'Give these instructions to the family of Jacob. Announce it to the descendants of Israel. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians. You know how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you will obey me and keep my covenant, you will be my own special treasure from among all the peoples on earth. For all the earth belongs to me, and you will be my kingdom of priests, my holy nation. And this is my message that you must give to the people of Israel.'" And that's the passage from Exodus 19. Woohoo! So God's saying to them, you will be my kingdom of priests. It's like he's saying, listen, this is what I saved you for, right? To be this nation of priests. And I think for a lot of us, the idea of being a priest is not too appealing at all. But what if our idea, like what we think it's going to be like, is different than what God has in mind when he says he wants us to be a kingdom of priests? So what I want to do is pause on this for a minute, take a couple of seconds, and let's unpack what God had in mind and what would the Israelites have understood in the ancient world when God said he wanted them to be a kingdom of priests. So God's people had just come out of Egypt, which was a culture that had more gods and goddesses that they worshiped than anywhere else. There are actually reports of as many as 1,500 different gods and goddesses in the Egyptian culture. So here's the thing. You wouldn't go anywhere in Egypt without being reminded of all these different gods. And even now in Egypt, there are two things that archaeologists have found over and over. As most people know, one of them is the pyramids. But the other thing that shows up all over the place in archaeology is temples, which makes a lot of sense because if you have hundreds or maybe even thousands of gods and goddesses, you would probably expect to find temples dedicated to worshiping them all throughout the land. And with all of those temples comes priests. So for the Israelites who had spent their whole life in Egypt, this would have just been common knowledge for them. So when God tells them that they're going to be a kingdom of priests, they really would have had an idea of what a priest was and what a priest did. But the things that they do are not really common knowledge today. So let's unpack what exactly a priest does. Woo-wee, are you in for a treat? We're out hiking around and came across some extra signs. And if you're not familiar with Canada, everything is printed in English and French, which gives me a lot of opportunities to practice my amazing French. For example, de la DC punt les vues de vente entre écoute de pini de haver de chemise. That's pretty much what it says in French. So in Egypt and other places where all of these various gods and goddesses and temples were located, it played out something like this. A regular person, me or you, right, would go to worship or offer a sacrifice to a god. And so to do that, we would go to the temple for that god. But then when we arrived, you would be reminded that the god is actually off limits to you. Instead, if you were lucky enough or had a good enough sacrifice, you would get to see the priest. And the priest was the one that mediated or went between the regular people and the god. They did this because they were literally the hands and feet of that god. Everyone believed that it was done that way because they thought the God who had authority had actually chosen that priest to act on his behalf, to be his literal physical representation to the people. So when the people went in and met with the priest, it was as if they were getting to meet with that God because they really believed that the priest had been chosen by that God. So that was the norm in the culture that God rescued his people from. God told them to go back down and give this message to all the people, not just a select few. He's essentially saying that he's authorizing all of them to be his kingdom of priests, to serve as his hands and feet, to show people in the world what he is like. So when people interact with them, it ought to be as if they are interacting with God. And then I think that's why right after this event, God gives them what we know is a thing called the Torah. That's just a word that gets translated in English as law, but maybe a better translation is that God gives them instruction or guidance, right? So this instruction that God gave them is what we know as the first 5 books of the Old Testament. That's the Torah. And all of that is about God giving his people instructions that were pertinent to them in the time and the culture that they lived in. So God's intent was to provide guidance and training to help his people be this kingdom of priests, right? To learn how to be the kind of people they needed to be because God had a really awesome plan in store for them. Check this out. So he was going to spend time investing in them and training them up. And then he was going to lead them to settle in the land of Canaan, which just so happens to be in one of the most highly trafficked areas in the entire ancient world. This is a place that served as essentially a giant land bridge between the Red Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. Everybody from the big nations to the north and the east of Egypt all had to go through this area back and forth to trade with Egypt. And it was God's desire to send them to that area to be a kingdom of priests, right? Into the the time, what was essentially the most epic hub of commerce and trade and technology in the ancient world. They would see how God's people conducted business and how they treated one another and how they took care of the poor and the needy. And the things that they would see would be so different from what they were used to that ultimately it would lead a lot of people to ask more. Like, what is it with you? Why do you live the way you do? Why are you doing business the way you're doing? Or why do you treat those people in need the way you are? And the questions would open the door to tell others about their God and even invite them to set aside all the other gods that they might have known about and learn how to follow the one true God of Israel. So for the Israelites, when they heard God saying to them that they're to be like a kingdom of priests for him, they really would have understood it as if God was saying to them, you are the message, right? You represent me in the world. Well, something really, really cool happened this week, as only God can do. Just days before working on the episode that you're watching now, I heard a story about a young woman, actually a few young women, and an elderly man. And someone in the story was really living like a priest, right? They were representing God in their everyday life. And I want you to meet them and see and hear for yourself what this can look like to live like a priest or a representative of God in your everyday life. Let's go and meet some really cool people.
Hi, my name is Eric. I'm 75 years old. In July of 2022, I ended up in the U of A hospital and stayed there for 82 days with a strong infection and a gallbladder removal that just made me think, along with other reasons, that I've had my life. I don't really want to go on living anymore. I've had a good life. I've seen lots. I've done lots. I've had a lot of awesome moments, and it didn't seem possible anymore. And if I was going to get out of the hospital, then I wanted to see the mountains one more time. Life did not really seem to have any meaning for me anymore. I wasn't going to commit suicide, though. That just seemed too terrible. So I worked out this 4-page plan during my stay in the hospital on how to die with dignity. It was very important for me there would be dignity in my death. And in my plans, 48 hours after leaving the hospital, I would put that in effect in a way that nobody would ever find my body in a beautiful place in the mountains. I would be in a cave. Somebody would find the car eventually parked in the parking lot, and they would see the notes and they would see the love letters. But I realized that probably most people would just think I committed suicide. I would know I died with dignity for the last 2 minutes of my life, but that would be all. So as soon as I was able to leave the hospital, my daughter had packed my car with all my camping equipment that I would need, and I headed out to Banff. It took me 2 days to get there, and the morning of the second day, I decided I would take some hikes, and the one I most wanted to do was the one to Sundance Canyon, which is by the lower hot springs. And that's what I did. Beautiful hike. There was some frost on the creek, ice on the creek, but it made it look even nicer. And I met 3 gals while I was there.
My name is Peyton, and I moved here a few months ago when I was offered an intern job at this church, Banff Park Church. The pastor actually knows my dad since he graduated at the Bible college that my dad is a cook at. So yeah, while we were here, we went on a road trip to Vancouver Island and stopped in at this church. And the pastor was like, thought maybe there's a reason that I was coming through and that he knew my dad. When I moved to Banff, a lot of my friends and family were like, oh, that's so cool, like there's so much hiking and like outdoorsy stuff to do, like skiing, snowboarding. And since I've been here, I've been on 2 hikes, and one of them, a lot of people who live here don't even call it a hike, so yeah. I've been skiing once. You won't see me a lot on hikes, that's just not really my thing, but I did happen to go on a few.
2 of them were German, one of them was English speaking, and I had our pleasantries. They were leaving. I was still going to see it.
Like I said, I've only been on 2 hikes since I've been here, and the day I went to Sundance Canyon, where I met Eric, my friends and I were planning to go, and my one friend, Tabea, she's so into hiking, like just loves that. She's done crazy hikes before. And so we decided we'd get a group of friends to go together, and we went to on this hike, and I, to be honest, did not want to go.
But I'm a pretty fast walker, and I ended up seeing the canyon and catch up with him on the way back.
I don't know, not in shape at all. So this is just like, gets my heart rate up, and yeah, so it's hard work for me. But anyway, I decided I would go.
And for some reason that I still can't explain, but where I begin to see the hand of God in what happened, the Canadian girl named Peyton separated herself from the other 2 girls and just walked with me and started talking to me.
Yeah, then we just started talking, and I think he asked us how we knew each other, because there was a group of, I think, 5 of us on that hike. And so I mentioned that we all met at church. We just decided to go on a hike one day together. Yeah, I asked him about himself, and that's when he was just sharing how he just got out of the hospital.
He said something to the effect of, I can see you're not very happy, which was surprising because I was very happy to see the mountains, and I would have thought I was smiling. And it was more like, I can see that something is bothering you. You're not comfortable. I knew I wasn't comfortable because I knew what was in my mind, but I didn't think it was showing. He said, well, you know something? In Banff, I know of a very welcoming and very warm church that I attend. Maybe you might like to come there, and maybe we would find some healing just by being there.
Yeah, I just remember thinking it was so cool how God works in bringing people together.
So the next Sunday, I think it was 2 days later, the next Sunday, sure enough, I showed up. She was there to greet me, smiles. She must have told some other people about me, because there were a lot of people who smiled at me, or maybe they always smiled, I don't know. It was just very warm and welcoming.
Yeah, so I think it was the next Sunday. I was in church, and I believe it was when the pastor said just to greet someone that you haven't seen that day. And I turned around and I saw Eric there. And I was just so happy to see him. I thought it was really cool. I really wasn't sure if he was going to show up. I had offered, but I just had no idea. And so it was really, really cool to see him there. I remember sharing the story with my family the day that I met Eric on that hike, and I just said, yeah, we met this man, super nice, and just was able to share with him that I'm a believer, and we invited him to our church here.
Hi, Peyton, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Great, I'm really great. I want to thank you once again so much for what you did that day when we were coming back from Sundance Canyon. It changed my life for me. I was in a real dark place, and I really wasn't sure I would get out of it or how I would get out of it. And you showed me a way by coming here. This place has been so warm and welcoming that it's just changed everything for me. It's enabled me to actually pray and ask for Jesus Christ to be my Savior, which I haven't been able to do for a long, long time. And that makes me feel a whole lot more secure because I'm not alone anymore. I have somebody looking after me, and I believe in that, and I really want to thank you for that. That was terrific. I hope that someday I can pass forward to somebody else what you did for me.
Well, over the past few months that I've gotten to know you, I've been so excited. I tell my mom every time that you come to church when you first started coming, I guess you showed up again. Eric came to church, and she's always like, oh, that's awesome. And they just know that just because I've shared with how excited I am that you've been coming and getting plugged into this church.
Absolutely.
And it's so fun seeing you at chili night, interacting with all the people, young people, old people. and seeing you at Soup's On and being able to talk there. And honestly, you're like a grandpa to me. Like, I'm just so thankful for being able to meet you, and just I love so much our conversations and being able to talk to you. And just seeing how God is at work in you, and through meeting you, God has been at work in my heart too, and just seeing just opportunities. Your story is one of the first that I've been able to see. Someone that I've shared the gospel with come to faith, and so it's just grown that faith inside of me to go out and just keep sharing the gospel, because you never know where people are at in their life.
That's right.
And so God just asks us to share and to plant the seed, and that He will do the rest. And so it's just been a great example.
And I really needed the planting of this seed. I was in a pretty desperate position, and it's been fantastic to be here, to see you involved in the church, always with a big smile, and I look forward to giving you that chess lesson.
Yes, me too.
May I give you a hug?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Really appreciate what you did for me. Saved my life.
Well, what a great story. And it really is a neat real life example of people representing God in their everyday life in such a way that somebody watching and interacting with them actually wanted to know more, right? So here's the deal. People are prone to forget important instructions. I know I definitely am, and I think we all can fall into that camp. So even though God made it clear what He wanted us saved for, He also went on to give His people some really unique help to remember what He wanted them saved for. So be sure you tune in next week, and we're going to learn about two bizarre things. Like, what are the odds? We're going to learn about two snails, and we're going to figure out what in the world a snail could possibly have to do with God instructing His people to remember what they were saved for. Now, here's the deal. I'll give you a hint. It has nothing to do with eating them, which is good, because otherwise I'm out. No escargot for this guy. Hey, we are so glad that you're with us on the journey. Be sure to subscribe to our channel, like this video, share it with your friends, all that good stuff. Also, if you want more guidance, learning your Bible, and growing as a follower of Jesus, we are here to help. You can sign up for our free weekly guide service, and there's going to be a link for that in the description below. And what's going to happen is every Saturday, you'll get an email from us with useful tips and tools and training nuggets. And best of all, we break it all down in plain English so that it's easy to understand and actually apply what you're learning. Speaking about learning, to learn more about us and what an online church could be all about, go over and check out our website at jointhejourneychurch.com. We're glad that you've been with us this week, and we're going to see you next week with one more really fascinating episode from Banff National Park. We hope you'll be back to see us and more of these amazing views.